Marcus Chun pushed his cleaning cart down the gleaming corridors of the Galactic Embassy, humming an old Earth tune under his breath. The massive structure housed representatives from 47 different species, each with their own atmospheric requirements, dietary needs, and cultural customs. As a night shift janitor, Marcus had seen it all during his 3 years of service. The Zephyrians needed their quarters kept at -20 degrees. The crystalline hegemony representatives shed microscopic mineral dust that required specialized vacuum equipment. The Aquatic Federation's envoys lived in pressurized water chambers that leaked constantly. But none of these challenges compared to the chaos emanating from the Royal Wing tonight. Even through the reinforced walls, Marcus could hear the distinctive wailing that had become a nightly occurrence. The sound wasn't quite like human crying, but it carried the same desperate note of distress that tugged at his heart. He paused outside the sealed entrance to Queen Zalara's quarters, where another exhausted caregiver was being escorted out by security. "That's the 14th nanny this month," muttered Captain Voss, the Terran security chief, as she approached Marcus. "The Queen is getting desperate. Her twins are challenging." Marcus had heard the rumors. Queen Zalara of the Nethys Empire had arrived 6 months ago for crucial peace negotiations, bringing her year-old twin offspring. The Nethys were an ancient species, highly intelligent, but notoriously difficult to understand. Their children were said to be even more complex, with abilities that manifested unpredictably in their early years. "What happened to this one?" Marcus asked, watching the latest failed caregiver stumble past. The being looked like it had been through a tornado, its usually pristine robes singed and torn. "Same as the others," Captain Voss sighed. "The twins rejected them within hours. They've driven away specialists from 12 different species. Child psychologists, telepathic counselors, even a legendary beast tamer from Rigel 7. Nothing works." Through the embassy's communication system, an announcement echoed in multiple languages. "Attention all embassy staff. Queen Zalara requests an immediate audience with Director Hawthorne. Priority level Alpha." Marcus continued his rounds, but his mind kept drifting back to those desperate cries. He'd grown up as the oldest of 6 children in a cramped apartment in New Shanghai. His mother worked double shifts at the factory, leaving Marcus to care for his younger siblings. He'd learned to read the subtle signs of hunger, fatigue, fear, and frustration in children who couldn't always express their needs clearly. The next morning, gossip spread through the embassy like wildfire. Queen Zalara had issued an ultimatum to the Galactic Council. If a suitable caregiver couldn't be found within 48 hours, she would abandon the peace negotiations and return to Nethys space. The implications were staggering. Without this treaty, 3-star systems would likely fall into war within the year. Marcus found himself assigned to clean the diplomatic meeting rooms, where he overheard fragments of increasingly desperate conversations. The council was offering unprecedented rewards for anyone who could successfully care for the royal twins. They'd contacted child-rearing specialists from across the galaxy, but none were willing to attempt what so many others had failed to achieve. "The twins are not malicious," explained Ambassador Kelnex, the Queen's aide, to a gathering of potential caregivers. "They're simply selective. Nethys children form deep emotional bonds, but they can sense insincerity or fear. They've rejected every candidate because none truly understood their needs." That evening, as Marcus cleaned the corridors outside the royal wing, the crying started again. But this time, something was different. Beneath the wailing, he could hear another sound, a rhythmic tapping, almost like a code. His years of caring for his siblings had taught him that children often tried to communicate in ways adults missed. He found himself stopping, really listening to the pattern. Top, top, pause, top. Top, top, pause, top. It was definitely intentional, almost musical. Without thinking, Marcus found himself tapping back on the metal handle of his mop bucket. Top, top, pause, top. The crying stopped immediately. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, tentatively, the tapping resumed, but with a different pattern. Top, 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 pause, top. Marcus smiled and responded with the same rhythm. This continued for several minutes. with the patterns becoming increasingly complex. "Who's out there?" A voice called through the translator system. The voice was melodic, but strained with exhaustion. Queen Zalara herself. "Just the cleaning staff, Your Majesty," Marcus called back. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you. You were communicating with my children?" Marcus hesitated. They seemed to be tapping out patterns. I thought they might want someone to respond. There was a long pause. Then, the door to the royal quarters slid open slightly. Queen Zalara appeared in the gap, tall, graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer between silver and blue. Her large, dark eyes held a mixture of hope and wariness. "No one has ever noticed their communication attempts before," she said quietly. "They tap when they're trying to express complex emotions that their vocal cords cannot yet handle. It's an ancient Nethys trait. I have 5 younger siblings back on Earth," Marcus explained. "You learn to pay attention to all the ways kids try to talk to you." Queen Zalara studied him carefully. Behind her, Marcus could see movement. 2 small figures peering around the doorway with curious eyes that seemed far too intelligent for children so young. "What is your name, cleaning person?" "Marcus Chun, Your Majesty." "Marcus Chun," she repeated, as if testing the sound. "My children have been asking for someone who understands. Perhaps would you be willing to meet them properly?" Before Marcus could fully process what was happening, he found himself nodding. "I'd be honored, Your Majesty." As the door opened wider, revealing the royal nursery beyond, Marcus realized his quiet life as a janitor was about to change forever. The twins stood behind their mother, and when they saw him, they both began the same rhythmic tapping that had started this extraordinary encounter. He tapped back, and, for the first time in months, the royal twins began to make sounds that weren't cries of distress. They were laughing. The royal nursery was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The walls seemed to pulse with a soft, bioluminescent glow that shifted from deep purple to warm gold, depending on the angle of view. Floating crystalline structures provided gentle lighting, while the floor was covered in what appeared to be living moss that responded to touch with ripples of color. The twins, Zara and Kale, were about the size of human toddlers, but clearly far more advanced intellectually. Their skin had the same shifting quality as their mother's, and their large eyes held an ancient wisdom that seemed impossible for beings so young. They watched Marcus with intense curiosity, their heads tilted in perfect synchronization. They have been rejecting caregivers because they can sense emotional authenticity, Queen Zalara explained, settling gracefully onto a chair that seemed to grow from the floor itself. Nethys children are born with limited telepathic abilities. They feel the true intentions of those around them. Marcus knelt down to the twins' eye level, remembering how important that had been with his own siblings. "Hello, Zara and Kale," he said gently. "I'm Marcus." Zara, who seemed to be the bolder of the two, stepped forward and placed a small hand on Marcus's arm. Her touch was warm, and he felt a strange, tingling sensation, as if she was somehow reading him. After a moment, she turned to her brother and made a series of complex hand gestures. Kale nodded solemnly and approached as well. He began the tapping pattern again, but this time on Marcus's knee. Marcus tapped back, and the boy's face lit up with delight. "Remarkable," Queen Zalara murmured. "They're trying to teach you their emotional language. The tapping represents different feeling states that they cannot yet vocalize." Over the next hour, Marcus found himself drawn into an intricate communication system. The twins used combinations of tapping, gesture, and even changes in their skin luminescence to express complex thoughts and emotions. When Zara was frustrated, her skin shifted to deep red patterns. When Kale was curious, he glowed with soft blue spirals. Marcus discovered that the children had been experiencing severe anxiety about the constant parade of strangers trying to care for them. Each new caregiver had approached them with fear, clinical detachment, or overwhelming enthusiasm that felt false to their sensitive perception. "They're scared," Marcus realized, watching Zara demonstrate a rapid, erratic tapping pattern. "All these people coming and going, they think everyone's going to leave them too." Queen Zalara's expression grew pained. "The negotiations require my attention for 12 to 14 hours daily. I thought hiring caregivers would help, but each failure has made them more distrustful. Marcus thought of his youngest sister, Lynn, who had clung to him desperately whenever their mother worked late shifts. Have you tried letting them help choose their caregiver? What do you mean? Let them interview the candidates. Kids know who they connect with. Adults usually just impose choices on them. The Queen considered this. Our previous attempts were handled entirely by the embassy staff. The children only met caregivers after they had been selected and briefed. She paused, but the negotiations cannot wait. Director Hawthorne has informed me that without a solution by tomorrow evening, the treaty discussions will be suspended indefinitely. Marcus looked at the twins, who were now playing with soft, glowing orbs that responded to their touch by changing colors and producing musical tones. They seemed like normal, intelligent children who just happened to be from an alien species. What if I stayed tonight, just to see how they do? Queen Zalara's eyes widened. You would be willing to attempt this? The consequences of failure. I've handled 5 kids during New Shanghai's flu epidemic of 2387, Marcus said with a slight smile. I think I can manage 2, even if they are royalty. After Queen Zalara departed for an emergency diplomatic session, Marcus found himself alone with the twins for the first time. Almost immediately, their behavior changed. The sophisticated communication attempts gave way to more typical, childlike testing of boundaries. Zara began pulling books from shelves and dropping them, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. When he calmly started stacking them back up and showed her how to make towers, she giggled and joined in. Kale, meanwhile, discovered that he could make the wall lights flash by touching them in certain patterns, clearly testing whether this new adult would stop him or scold him. Marcus remembered his brother Jamie going through a similar phase. Instead of prohibiting the light play, he sat with Kale and helped him create more complex light patterns, turning it into a learning game. You're both pretty smart, Marcus said, settling between them on the soft floor. But I bet you're also tired. It's been a long day. Zara immediately began her agitated red patterns, and Kale started the rapid tapping that Marcus now recognized as distress. They clearly associated bedtime with being left alone. I'm not going anywhere, Marcus assured them. How about we make a deal? I'll stay right here while you sleep, and if you wake up scared, you can tap for me, and I'll answer. It took nearly an hour of patient reassurance, but eventually both children settled into what appeared to be meditation cushions that molded themselves to their small forms. As they drifted off, their skin took on a peaceful silver glow. Marcus made himself comfortable in a nearby chair that adjusted automatically to his human physiology. He pulled out his personal tablet and began researching Nethi's culture and child-rearing practices, determined to understand his charges better. Around midnight, he was awakened by gentle tapping. Kale was sitting up, his skin cycling through nervous yellow patterns. Marcus tapped back immediately, and the boy's relief was visible as his coloring returned to calm silver. Bad dream? Marcus asked softly. Kale made a complex series of hand gestures, then pointed to the wall where shadows from the floating lights created moving patterns. Marcus understood. The shifting shadows had seemed threatening in the dark. Want me to show you something? Marcus whispered. He used his hands to create shadow puppets on the wall, a rabbit, a bird, a dancing figure. Kale watched in fascination, then tried to copy the movements. Soon both twins were awake and giggling softly as Marcus taught them to make shadow animals. The game continued until they were yawning, and this time they settled back to sleep without anxiety. When Queen Zalara returned before dawn, she found Marcus asleep in the chair with both children curled up nearby. The twins had moved their meditation cushions closer to his position, and their skin glowed with the steady, peaceful silver that indicated deep contentment. For the first time in months, her children had slept through the night. Word of Marcus's success spread through the embassy like ripples in still water. By morning, representatives from dozens of species had gathered to witness the impossible, a human janitor succeeding where trained specialists had failed. Director Hawthorne summoned Marcus to his office, where the Galactic Council's most senior diplomats waited with expressions ranging from amazement to skepticism. Mr. Chun, Director Hawthorne began, his weathered face creased with worry. Queen Zalara has made an extraordinary request. She wants to formally hire you as the royal caretaker for the duration of the negotiations. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, acutely aware that his cleaning uniform was hardly appropriate for a meeting with galactic dignitaries. I'm honored, sir, but I'm not qualified. I don't have training in xenobiology or diplomatic protocols. Ambassador Thornfield of the Regellian Collective leaned forward, her tentacles writhing with agitation. This is precisely our concern. The royal twins of Nethys will one day hold significant political power. Their care cannot be entrusted to someone without proper credentials. Credentials didn't help the previous 14 caregivers, Queen Zalara interjected as she entered the room. The twins flanked her, and Marcus noticed they both immediately began glowing with the soft blue patterns he'd learned indicated happiness. When they saw him, both children started their rhythmic tapping in unison. Marcus instinctively tapped back, and the twins giggled, a sound that made several diplomats jump. It was the first time anyone in the embassy had heard the royal children express joy. My children have made their choice clear, the Queen continued. Marcus Chun understands them in ways that trained specialists do not. However, I recognize the Council's concerns about protocol. She turned to Marcus. Would you be willing to undergo accelerated training while caring for Zara and Kale? Ambassador Kelnex could teach you essential diplomatic customs, and Dr. Valen could provide xenobiology education. The negotiations are at a critical juncture, Director Hawthorne added. The hegemony fleet is positioning near the disputed systems. Without this treaty, we could see open warfare within days. Marcus looked at the twins, who were watching him with those impossibly intelligent eyes. Zara made a subtle hand gesture, one he'd learned meant please in their complex communication system. I'll do whatever's needed to help, he said finally. The next few days passed in a blur of intensive education. While the twins napped, Marcus studied Nethys history, biology, and cultural practices with Dr. Valen, a kindly Altarian scientist. During their playtime, Ambassador Kelnex taught him basic diplomatic protocols. Marcus learned that Nethys society was built around emotional honesty and deep familial bonds. Deception was not just frowned upon, but was physiologically difficult for their species. Their skin patterns betrayed their true feelings. This explained why the twins could so easily detect insincerity in potential caregivers. Traditional Nethys child-rearing involves extended family units where children interact constantly with multiple generations, Dr. Valen explained as she monitored the twins' vital signs during their afternoon rest. Queen Zalara's situation is unusual. She's essentially raising them alone while under tremendous political pressure. Marcus absorbed this information while developing his own understanding of the children. Zara was bold and exploratory, often testing boundaries and seeking new experiences. Kale was more analytical, preferring to observe and think before acting. Both were incredibly empathetic, their moods shifting in response to the emotions of those around them. This sensitivity became a problem during the fourth day. The twins had been unusually agitated, their skin flickering between anxious yellow and distressed red. Marcus couldn't determine the cause until he realized they were responding to the tension radiating from the adult negotiations happening several floors below. They're picking up on the diplomatic stress, he explained to Queen Zalara during one of her brief visits. Even though they can't understand the political implications, they feel everyone's anxiety about the treaty. The Queen's expression grew troubled. The negotiations are not going well. The hegemony is demanding territorial concessions that my people cannot accept. If talks break down, that evening, Marcus implemented a new strategy. Instead of trying to distract the twins from the ambient stress, he acknowledged their feelings while helping them understand what was happening. Your mom is working very hard to help different groups of people get along, he explained, using simple concepts they could grasp. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, and it takes time to find solutions that make everyone happy. He taught them a modified version of breathing exercises his mother had used to calm his siblings during thunderstorms. The twins adapted the technique to their own physiology, their skin patterns becoming more stable and peaceful. As word spread about Marcus's methods, other embassy staff began seeking his advice about their own children. Lieutenant Morrison asked for help with her teenage daughter who was struggling with the isolation of embassy life. Dr. Chun, no relation, despite the shared surname, wanted guidance for his young son who was afraid of the diverse alien species in the embassy. Marcus found himself becoming an unofficial counselor, drawing on his experience with human siblings to bridge gaps between species. He realized that children, regardless of their origin, shared common needs for security, understanding, and authentic connection. The breakthrough came during the second week. Marcus was playing a pattern recognition game with the twins when Zara suddenly grabbed his hand and led him to a complex wall display that showed real-time diplomatic communications. She pointed at flashing red indicators and made distressed tapping sounds. She's reading the diplomatic status board, Marcus realized with amazement. She understands that the red lights mean problems. Kale joined his sister, and together they began an elaborate communication sequence involving taps, gestures, and skin patterns. Marcus watched carefully, trying to decode their message. "I think they're suggesting something," he told Queen Zalara when she arrived for her evening visit. "They keep pointing between the status board and themselves, then making gestures toward the diplomatic levels." Queen Zalara studied her children thoughtfully. In traditional Nethys culture, children often serve as emotional mediators during adult conflicts. Their natural empathy helps adults remember what they're really fighting for, the future welfare of the young. "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" Marcus asked. "It's unconventional, but perhaps it's time for unconventional solutions." That night, Queen Zalara made an unprecedented request to the Galactic Council. She wanted to bring her children to the next day's negotiation session, with Marcus as their guardian and interpreter. The request sparked heated debate among the diplomats, but with the treaty hanging by a thread, they were willing to try anything that might break the deadlock. The grand negotiation chamber fell silent as Marcus entered with the royal twins. Representatives from 47 species turned to stare at the unusual sight. A human janitor in hastily fitted diplomatic attire, accompanied by two small Nethys children whose skin patterns shifted curiously as they took in a massive room. The chamber was a marvel of diplomatic engineering. Each delegation sat in customized environmental pods suited to their species' needs. Translators worked overtime to convert concepts between radically different languages and thought patterns. At the center, holographic displays showed contested star systems, trade routes, and territorial boundaries that had sparked months of deadlocked negotiations. Zara and Kale stayed close to Marcus, their eyes wide as they observed the assembled representatives. Their skin patterns were cycling through rapid sequences of blue and silver, intense curiosity mixed with cautious assessment. "Your Majesties, distinguished delegates," Director Hawthorne announced, "Queen Zalara has requested that her children observe today's proceedings as part of their cultural education." General Krax of the Hegemony Fleet rose from his crystalline pod, his insectoid features clicking with disapproval. "This is highly irregular. Children have no place in military strategic discussions." "Perhaps that's exactly the problem," Queen Zalara replied calmly. "We've been discussing the future as if it were an abstract concept. My children represent the reality we're supposedly protecting." Marcus guided the twins to a small observation area that had been prepared for them. They sat quietly, but he could see their communication patterns intensifying as they watched the adults. Their tapping became more complex, and their skin patterns shifted in response to the emotional undercurrents in the room. The negotiations resumed, with Delegate Vash of the Altarian Council presenting the latest territorial compromise. The proposal involved complex redistributions of mining rights, shipping lanes, and defensive installations across 3-star systems. The hegemony's demands for exclusive access to the Kepler Nebula resources remain unacceptable, Queen Zalara stated firmly. Those materials are essential for maintaining life support on 14 Nethys colonies. And our security concerns about Nethys' expansion toward the Rigel sectors cannot be ignored, General Krax replied, his mandibles clicking aggressively. As the familiar arguments resumed, Marcus noticed the twins becoming increasingly agitated. Their skin patterns were shifting to the distressed red he'd learned to recognize, and their tapping became rapid and erratic. But something else was happening. Other representatives were glancing at the children, and Marcus realized their emotional distress was affecting the room's atmosphere. Species with any empathic abilities were responding to the twins' anxiety. Ambassador Thornfield of the Rigelian Collective suddenly spoke up. Perhaps we could examine the resource allocation from a different perspective. It was the first new suggestion anyone had made in 3 days. Zara tugged on Marcus's sleeve and pointed to the holographic display showing the contested Kepler Nebula. She made a series of hand gestures, then began a specific tapping pattern. Marcus had learned enough of their communication system to understand basic concepts. I think she's saying something about sharing, he whispered to Queen Zalara. Kale joined his sister, adding his own gestures and pointing to different regions on the display. Their combined communication was more complex than anything Marcus had seen before. Your Majesty, Marcus said quietly, I think they're trying to propose something. Queen Zalara studied her children carefully. In Nethys culture, children's insights were valued precisely because they weren't constrained by adult preconceptions. What are they suggesting, Marcus? Marcus watched the twins' elaborate communication sequence, piecing together the concepts they were expressing. They keep pointing to the resource zones and making sharing gestures. But not just splitting things in half, they're indicating something more complex. He paused, trying to understand their meaning. I think they're suggesting rotation, like taking turns but on a larger scale. Seasonal access rotation. Queen Zalara breathed, understanding. The Kepler Nebula's resource density varies with its orbital pattern. Different materials are most accessible at different times. She stood and addressed the assembly. My children have observed something we adults have missed. The Kepler Nebula's resources follow natural cycles. Instead of fighting over permanent exclusive access, we could establish a rotating schedule based on each species' specific needs and the nebula's natural resource availability. General Krax's antennae twitched with interest. Explain. Dr. Valen pulled up detailed astronomical data on the chamber's main display. The nebula's composition shifts over an 18-month cycle. During the first 6 months, the materials essential for Nethys' life support are most concentrated. During the middle period, the strategic metals the hegemony requires are at peak accessibility. And during the final phase, the rare elements needed for Rigelian technology are most easily extracted, Ambassador Thornfield added, her tentacles writhing with excitement. The twins watched this development with satisfaction, their skin patterns now showing the steady gold that Marcus had learned indicated contentment and accomplishment. But the negotiations were far from over. The territorial disputes remained unresolved, and the question of defensive installations still loomed large. As discussions continued into the evening, Marcus noticed that the twins were serving as an unusual kind of emotional barometer for the room. When tensions rose and positions became entrenched, their distress patterns would intensify, unconsciously encouraging delegates to reconsider their approach. When genuine progress occurred, their peaceful glowing helped maintain the positive momentum. During a recess, Marcus overheard a conversation between 2 junior diplomats. Have you noticed how much more reasonable everyone sounds today? One asked. It's those children, the other replied. Hard to argue for warfare when you're looking at the beings who'll inherit the consequences. The twins themselves seemed to understand their role. They began approaching different delegations during breaks, not speaking, but simply being present. Their innocent curiosity about various species helped break down barriers that formal diplomacy couldn't address. Marcus watched Zara gravely examine General Krax's compound eyes, while the massive insectoid being explained how his species perceived light differently than others. The interaction was helping both sides understand each other as individuals rather than political abstractions. Meanwhile, Kale had become fascinated with the crystalline hegemony's representative, whose silicon-based body structure created beautiful light refractions. The delegate found itself explaining concepts of mineral consciousness and geological time to an audience that listened with genuine wonder. As the day session drew to a close, significant progress had been made on resource sharing. But the most challenging issues still remained unresolved, and time was running out. That evening, as Marcus helped the twins prepare for sleep, they surprised him by creating the most complex communication sequence he'd ever seen from them. Their tapping patterns, gestures, and skin displays worked together in an intricate dance of meaning. He could understand most of it, but one message came through clearly. Tomorrow, they wanted to try something bigger. The final day of negotiations dawned with an atmosphere of desperate urgency. Military reports indicated that the hegemony fleet had moved closer to the disputed systems, while Nethy's defense forces had begun mobilizing in response. If the talks failed today, three-star systems would likely be at war within hours. Marcus arrived at the royal quarters to find the twins unusually focused and purposeful. Their skin patterns were steady and determined, cycling through deep blues and silvers that he'd learned indicated serious concentration. "They've been like this since dawn," Queen Zalara reported, worry evident in her voice. "They keep making gestures toward the negotiation chamber and tapping complex patterns I don't recognize." Marcus knelt beside Zara and Kale, studying their communication attempts. The patterns were indeed unfamiliar, more sophisticated than anything they'd shown before. "I think they've been working together on something overnight," he realized, like they were planning. In the negotiation chamber, the atmosphere was tenser than ever. The territorial disputes had proven intractable, with each side unwilling to compromise on strategic defense positions. The resource-sharing agreement was solid, but it meant nothing if war broke out over the deeper conflicts. General Krax stood to address the assembly, his usually controlled demeanor showing cracks of frustration. The hegemony cannot accept Nethy's expansion into the buffer zones. Our analysis indicates a 73% probability of future conflict if current proposals are implemented. And we cannot abandon our colonies to satisfy hegemony paranoia, Queen Zalara replied firmly. Our people have lived in those systems for 3 generations. As the familiar deadlock reasserted itself, Marcus noticed the twins becoming unusually active. Instead of their typical distressed patterns when negotiations stalled, they were glowing with purposeful energy. Zara stood up and walked directly to the center of the chamber, where the holographic display showed the contested star systems. Every delegate turned to watch the small figure standing among the complex 3-dimensional maps. Kale joined his sister, and together they began an extraordinary performance. Using their bioluminescent skin patterns, they started creating their own light display that interacted with the holographic projections. "What are they doing?" Director Hawthorne whispered. Marcus watched in amazement as the twins' coordinated light patterns began aligning with specific features of the star maps. "I think they're trying to show us something we're not seeing." The children's display continued, their synchronized patterns creating flowing connections between different systems and regions. Where the adults saw separate territories to be divided and defended, the twins were illustrating something more complex. Migration patterns, Dr. Valen breathed suddenly. "They're showing natural migration patterns." Queen Zalara leaned forward, studying her children's light language with growing understanding. "Zara, Kale, are you saying the systems shouldn't be divided at all?" The twins turned to their mother and began their most elaborate communication sequence yet. Their tapping rhythms, hand gestures, and skin patterns worked together to express concepts that transcended simple territorial thinking. Marcus found himself translating, drawing on weeks of learning their unique language. They're suggesting that the conflict is based on a false assumption. The systems aren't separate territories to be claimed. They're part of a larger ecosystem that works best when it's managed cooperatively. Ambassador Thornfield's tentacles writhed with excitement. A joint administration system. Instead of territorial division, create integrated management zones with shared governance. Impossible. General Krax clicked dismissively. Joint governance has never worked on this scale. But the twins weren't finished. Kale approached the general's environmental pod and began a gentle tapping pattern on its transparent surface. To everyone's amazement, the formidable military leader leaned down to observe the small child more closely. Zara joined her brother, and together they created a demonstration using the chamber's interactive systems. Their small hands moved across light panel controls, showing how shared monitoring networks could provide better security than isolated defensive positions. Joint early warning systems, General Krax murmured, his compound eyes reflecting the twins' light patterns. Collaborative threat assessment rather than competing intelligence gathering. The children's presentation continued, but Marcus realized their message went deeper than strategic proposals. They were demonstrating something fundamental about cooperation itself. Look how they're working together, he pointed out to the assembly. They're not just communicating, they're thinking as a unified system. Each one amplifies the other's abilities. As if to emphasize this point, the twins began involving other representatives in their demonstration. They guided Ambassador Thornfield's tentacles to manipulate certain controls while directing General Krax to adjust others. Soon, delegates from multiple species were participating in the collaborative display. The holographic representation transformed from a map of contested territories into a dynamic model of interconnected systems. Trade routes, resource flows, communication networks, and defense grids were all shown as parts of a larger whole. This is remarkable, Director Hawthorne said. Instead of zero-sum territorial competition, they're proposing positive-sum collaborative expansion. But the most significant moment came when the twins approached the representatives of the three smallest species delegations, groups that had remained silent throughout the negotiations because their territories weren't directly involved in the major disputes. Using their universal language of light and gesture, Zara and Kale demonstrated how these smaller entities could serve as neutral administrators and mediators in the joint governance system. Their size disadvantage became a strength, as they could provide objective oversight without threatening the larger powers. Children often see solutions that adults miss because they haven't learned to think in terms of limitations, Marcus observed. They're showing us that cooperation multiplies strength instead of dividing it. The negotiations that followed were unlike any in galactic history. Instead of each delegation defending fixed positions, representatives began building on each other's ideas. The twins continued to move through the chamber, their presence serving as a constant reminder that the decisions being made would shape the universe they inherited. The final treaty established the first cooperative governance zone in galactic history. The three contested star systems would be administered jointly, with rotating leadership and shared benefits. The smaller species would provide neutral oversight, while the major powers contributed resources and expertise according to their strengths. Most importantly, the agreement included provisions for regular review and adaptation, acknowledging that like the children who had inspired it, the arrangement would need to grow and change over time. As the formal signing ceremony concluded, Marcus found himself standing with the twins as representatives from 47 species affixed their agreements to the historic document. The children watched solemnly, perhaps understanding that they had helped prevent a war that could have shaped their entire lives. "How did you know they could do this?" Queen Zalara asked Marcus as the celebration continued around them. Marcus smiled, watching Zara and Kale now playing contentedly with geometric light toys that several delegates had given them as gifts. "I didn't know they could solve galactic politics, but I knew they were smart kids who needed someone to listen to them. Sometimes that's all children really want, for adults to pay attention to what they're trying to tell us." 3 months later, Marcus received a formal appointment as the first human ambassador for child advocacy, with a mandate to ensure that young voices were included in galactic decision-making. The cooperative governance zone was already showing remarkable success, with improved security, increased prosperity, and innovative solutions emerging from its collaborative approach. But perhaps the most significant change was simpler than all the political achievements. Throughout the galaxy, diplomatic missions began including childcare specialists and family services as standard components of their operations. The understanding that children's well-being was inseparable from political stability became a fundamental principle of galactic governance. Marcus still cleaned occasionally, not because he had to, but because it reminded him that important truths could be found in the humblest circumstances. And every evening, no matter how complex his diplomatic duties became, he made time to play pattern games with Zara and Kale, learning new things about communication, cooperation, and the remarkable insights that emerge when adults remember to listen to the wisdom of children. The Galactic Council's official records list the treaty as the Cooperative Governance Accords. But throughout known space, it became known by a simpler name, the Children's Peace. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most important solutions come not from experts or specialists, but from those who see the universe with fresh eyes and hearts unclouded by old assumptions about what's impossible.